Well,
Yeah.
thanks so much for making time with us today, and maybe I'll just jump right into it and ask you the first question.
Sure.
And I'm wondering if you could start by talking about your process of writing for and improvising with a large ensemble. I
Hmm.
really enjoyed listening to your most recent CD, Chaos Practices.
That's
I,
actually not the most recent
oh,
one.
that's not the most recent.
The most recent one is called Dreamt Twice, Twice Dreamt.
Oh, yes, yeah, but that's also for large ensemble,
It's
right?
all one
Half
half
of
of
it.
it is for
Mm-hmm.
large ensemble. Yeah. Um, I think yeah. I've been thinking about that. Like the contemporary chaos practices has two pieces in on it, two large pieces. The second one is called Vogelfrei, and it was actually originally written for a classical group, for the ACO orchestra. So there was no improvisation in it at all. Then I had a sort of a chance to rework it for the Tricentric Foundation Orchestra, which is the orchestra sort of based around Anthony Braxton's music, and Anthony Braxton's a foundation that looks after his legacy and music. Um, and because I knew the orchestra basically incorporated a lot of improvisers as well as classical and new music musicians, I opened it up and started introducing improvisation into it. And then I realized, and also playing in Braxton's large ensembles and seeing how he integrates conduction and improvisation into anything, including opera, um, it sort of sparked my curiosity. So I started, like when I wrote contemporary chaos practices, I knew that I wanted to feature particular soloistic voices. In this case, Mary Halvorson and Nate Woolley and Chris Davis and myself. Um, and then I kind of treated it a little bit like I know to a degree what they sound like and what they will do, and I try to have an element that is fixed, right? So because there's so many people, so some elements are composed, and I know that. I mean, no, there's a high degree of composition, but even under the improvised parts, there are composed elements, and then there is conduction, hand signal conduction, like Butch Morris would do, or Anthony Braxton, many proponents. Um, that are basically a mutable element. So the soloist can generate something that the conductor can react to, or the other way around. So that it's not it's basically there's scope for variation and also scope for uh, reaction and a certain spark that is different to blowing over a completely fixed background. For the new one, for Dreamt Twice, Twice Dreamt, I used a little less of that improvisational. That I used the orchestra less in an improvisation context, but I let the soloists be very free with what they're playing over, um, and yeah, there are a few moments in there where the conductor can uh, modify what the string parts are doing, with hand signals, and she does it very intuitively, really, like with big gestures and very physically, sort of might have gestures for swirls, and this is quite. I left that kind of up to her, um, but most of the improvising on that particular large ensemble record is done by the invited guests. I wrote the orchestra parts, or there's many different strategies on this on that record, but some of them I wrote that they're quite sort of fleeting and they sound like they might be improvised, or they sound like they're they give you many openings. It's not like, say, like a stash of chords or something where you don't have as many choices that you can make, but they're textural, very textural and swishy, kind of sometimes fleeting. So it's not too much of a block. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
Love it.
wondering how, to piggyback off of that, how you rehearse in that kind of setting. Like what do you focus on when you're rehearsing, and do you do a lot of coaching when it's your own piece in that setting? Um, yeah, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So for contemporary chaos practices, we actually original orchestra that played it is the orchestra that now recorded Dreamt Twice, Twice Dreamt, because it was commissioned for a festival in Germany, and this particular orchestra is in Cologne. So they are a mix of new music musicians and classically trained musicians. The conductor is a classical conductor, so I knew that to have to that I needed a second conductor to do the improvised conduction, the Braxton signal conduction. So I invited Taylor Hobeinam in, and we had two conductors. Susanne Blumenthal, the German conductor, would conduct the straight parts and also rehearse the straight parts. And then I had Taylor Hobeinam have these sessions where he briefly explains the conduction language, which in this case is very simple. It's only 10 signs, so you can memorize it quickly and you don't have to look through tons and tons of pages. And even during the performance, the live performance, the conductors would change. So one would get off the box and the other one would, of the podium, and the other one would jump up, and vice versa. When we recorded it in New York, I was able to sort of pick the musicians that I wanted to also have in the orchestra. There's so many amazing new music players here who are also also great improvisers and really interested in that. And my friend Erica Dicker, who's a great violinist who also plays Braxton a lot, we sat, she sort of became my manager for this project, and we sat down together. We concocted sort of my dream group, and her, with her, a lot of her input, because she knows that scene better than I do. And then she kind of vetted them. Like, she put out a questionnaire and she said, like, are you interested in improvisation? Would you be open to it? Are you, and so we knew that the people who were going to be recording, going to be with us, were up for it and really wanted to explore that side of things, which is really helpful, because you don't want people to be uncomfortable in that situation, I think. Yeah, and then I had Eric Wobbles. We had the same kind of two conductor scheme, but Eric Wobbles was doing the straight stuff, and Taylor Hobeinam came in to do to then mess it up with these hand signals.
With so many forces in an ensemble that large, how do you think about organizing your material or your sonic contributions when you're improvising with so many different people that are backing you up, as well as other soloists?
Yeah, that was the thing. I didn't think too much about it. I trust that just the sheer experience of being in so much sound, and that there's so much input coming at me. I trust that will spark something off. I didn't actually prepare too much in that respect, because I think that's sort of my fun, is to not do that and to just jump in and see what happens. But I think I did design the pieces so that I could do that. There were maybe a few, maybe, for example, there is a long, pretty, a string kind of pad section, a piece called Snow Cows, long end section with a lot of harmony. So yeah, I had to make myself a chart where I can really see the chords, and I can reflect to it melodically and functionally if I wanted to. I think it was more the preparation of charts for me, so that I could allow myself to be fairly free, but I would have points where I know there are plenty of cues that I know I could jump back into this at this point, or I could grab this note, or basically little fail-safe sort of portals back into the written music. But my part has been basically for the most part improvised in a large group. I don't play a lot of written parts in it.
Was the same true for the other soloists?
I think the person with no, it wasn't. The bass player, Robert Lanferman, had a bunch of written things, because he also is, he sort of, he has to be very flexible by jumping into really jazz bass playing and then improvising. So he had well, actually, let me think about that. We ended up giving most of the through composed double bass part to the classically trained musician, because they were in different places in the room. They couldn't hear each other that well, so it was safer to just have one person play them. Whereas Robert ended up playing sort of the jazz parts and the improvised parts. Corey Smythe is probably the person who has the most had to deal with the most written parts, mostly because he's on both records, and there's like a lot of like a lot of piano notation, and he can do it. It's very easy for him to to play anything. So I knew I could. He wouldn't be like freaked out by jumping between these different roles. Few drum parts are written out, but mostly I left Tom Rainey to do what he wants to do, because he's also really somebody who's from a jazz background. He's a great reader, but his best thing is when he can just play.
So in this case, did you write the music for, I guess, either of the most recent large ensemble recordings and projects? Did you write all of the music after knowing who would be in the ensemble so that it could be tailored to those people, especially the written out parts?
Well, no. So on Contemporary Chaos Practices, because Vogelfrei was originally written for the ACO, I did not write it for any of the soloists, so it was completely notated. Contemporary Chaos Practices, I did know who the soloists were, so yes, I did definitely, especially when it came to backgrounds and when it came to where does the music go, I did sort of try and envisage, a little bit like, there's this sort of tradition of that Duke Ellington or Charles Mingus also write, the way they have written, like where you actually do incorporate, the voices, in Dreamt Twice, Twice Dreamt, I wrote so that one side is small group versions, one side is large group version. I wrote the small ones first, and they were for Corey, Smythe, Sam Pluter, and I. And that I knew that these were going to be the core, and I also knew that I was going to invite George Mortney on violin. But then I didn't, at the point of conception, I didn't know the rest, But then, of course, when I started expanding it into up to sextet versions and into the large scale pieces, I started thinking about it again. I started thinking about how can I incorporate these people? What can I do that it's like still fun for them to play, and not stifling.
So that project, so when you started it, you didn't know it would grow into a large ensemble, like an addition of the large ensemble? Like, if that's the case, how did that happen? How did you have that
I
idea?
sort of knew because the conductor Susanne, she had said that they were planning to commission me. So at that point I'd already started writing on the small pieces, and I always wanted to do this kind of variation thing. So I suggested it to her, and then it was just a question of were they going to get the money from the German government or whatever that was.
So in terms of the smaller groups or band formations in general, when you put these together on, like, if you're the band leader and you want to start a new group or have done so in the past, like, what are the things that you consider when you do that?
Yeah, those are all good questions, but that's like one I've asked myself. I ask myself often, because I think personality is super important for me. Sometimes more than instrument, and it's happened often that I've like heard a player and I thought I really want that sound, and it's not like, oh yeah, I want to write something for a violin, let me find a violinist. It's sort of very tied together with the person usually. And again, we're lucky here because here you can do both at the same time, so you can kind of go like, I love like I really want to write something for a great violinist, and there are some to choose from that are amazing and amazingly different, like they all bring something very special to the game. And but yeah, for me, personality and sort of like a sense of creativity and uniqueness are very important.
And these ensembles and bands that you're leading, that you write for, how do these compositions come together for those groups? Do you get together and improvise, and some of those ideas get cemented into your compositions, or do you show up with charts that you've already written out, or what's your process for writing for these bands?
Right. So one of the things that I really liked in New York, or that happens in Brooklyn a lot, even, and that it was quite different in London, is that even musicians who tend to play a lot of composed music, or like a lot of jazz or whatnot, when you meet for the first time, you often improvise just to sound each other out, because then you don't have to immediately deal with eye to paper, with that kind of coordination. You can just like really um, feel each other out. So it's a little bit of both. For example, people like Chris Davis or Mary Halverson, or Tyshawn Sorey. Chris Davis and Tyshawn Sorey and I, we had a group called Paradoxical Frog. When we first met, we improvised, and then we were like, yeah, we have the same, we have chemistry and we understand each other musically, so let's write for this. And I think that's how most of my bands come about. But when it's my group, and I usually come to the rehearsal with fully written out charts that are then, of course, once we play them, I revise them most of the time.
Yeah. Is it kind of open, like when you do that, are the other musicians making suggestions, or it's just by them playing and you sort of hearing them actually play what's there and that you adjust? I'm just wondering how much like artistic collaboration there is in the composition itself.
Oh, I mean, I'm always open to suggestions. It's never been anybody can say anything, and then it's just like really, if I'm completely convinced that this is what I'm hearing and this is what I want, I'll just say like, no, we just try and make it work. But I have just as often said like, yeah, okay, and if this is better on your instrument, or if this is much more, gives you more freedom to express, let's change it. I'm completely open about that. I don't mind revising, I don't mind rewriting, except for when I really think I know this is going to be just so, which also happens. And of course, like the larger the group, the less you can have this kind of input, because you'll be like wasting so much time in rehearsals. But with smaller groups, like quartets, quintets, yes, we discuss stuff. And most of the improvised part, most of the kind of solo parts in my music are open. So I just write open, and it's just like that the musicians I play with tend to have a sort of like a sense of doing something with the material that's already been there. So they're very good at tying it into the composition, and also sort of they have a kind of compositional sense themselves, which is why I usually trust them with that they make something out of it.
Are those open sections completely free, or do you give like a harmonic structure, like a lead sheet situation?
I mean, different songs do different things. Sometimes you might have a background come in. Sometimes you might just have a tiny musical cue that people have to listen out for to snap back. Say, like, for example, you have an open section that has no specific time, or people can do whatever they feel is the right thing. I might have a little rhythmical cue or so that flips it back into the music, and from then on, people know they have to be in back in time. So you do have to be on your toes in a way, but sometimes I have a vamp, or I have some, like a structure, but very chords. I have not written chord changes in a long time. It just, I don't know. It's just like without chord changes, you have more. You can invite players from different disciplines better than if you have chord changes. Even sometimes there might be a couple of changes.
Historically, in your evolution as a musician and learning how to play jazz and free music, what has been your relationship to harmony? Have you spent a lot of time practicing chord changes, like the blues and stuff like this, and then you deviated away from it, or did you start right away thinking like, no, I want to play more free and
No, I
open stuff?
absolutely deviated away from it. I was like, I mean, I played so much bossa nova in my life, you know. I was way into Brazilian music and played with a lot of Brazilian musicians. And bossa nova has so much functional harmony, for example, right? So I did uh, study that. I also studied. I mean, I practiced jazz standards. There was a few years where I played nothing else but jazz standards, really, um, or transcribed solos and memorized solos by other players and then analyzed them. You know, so I'm definitely coming from that background. But I guess there was a time where I kind of felt like that had been already very adequately covered. You know, not that there's not a ton to explore, but I also did feel like, I mean, there have been so many amazing jazz musicians, you know, dealing with that and dealing with standard forms, and it continues. You know, I just realized that that might not be my personal way. You know, I have too many interests. You know, and I felt like I needed to find different ways of like making my own world out of them, and I still feel like that. You know.
Do you think that a lot of your interest in combining, people from different backgrounds has to do with your childhood, like growing up in a home where there was a lot of classical music too? Like you always kind of held that interest. I just wonder if you would have come to that if that hadn't been your background. I guess you'll never know, but I'm just wondering how that factored in, how you think it
Yeah,
factored in.
I'm sure it factored in. I'm pretty sure. Like, I mean that my parents were like super. My dad is like a Beethoven maniac. You know, he would be like, and he's also an amateur piano player. So I heard him late at night all the time practicing. You know, that was sort of my soundtrack to go to sleep. They both sang in choirs, so you know, I was exposed to it, and also, you know, they would take me to concerts, like their concerts. You know, I'd be like Matthew, St. Matthew's Passion, or you know, long pieces, and I really dug it. Like as a kid, it was just this sort of trancey thing, you know, and but um, so yeah, I think that sound, and my mother was she was a elementary school teacher, um, so she would like play us records, like really programmatic records, like Carnival of the Animals, or Peter and the Wolf, or Pictures of an Exhibition, you know. um, and she would like sort of talk me through, it was almost like storytelling. She would talk me through what the instruments might represent and how this instrument might be imitating this animal, etc. So there was always some kind of connection to sounds of different instruments. You know, like I think, yeah, I always, you know, that was always there. And as a kid, I played piano, so I loved Bach from an early age, and I still do. Like when the pandemic hit, I couldn't write. I couldn't. I was like so paralyzed. You know, I went back, and I think this is an experience many people had. I went and um, practiced Goldberg variation at a super slow pace on the piano, just because I needed to. It was almost like my comfort zone, and going back to childhood. You know, yeah. So it's definitely been there.
So you came to the saxophone at the age of 18, right?
Hmm.
And
Almost 19. Yeah.
almost 19. So you have a kind of a classical piano background. When you started to pick up the saxophone, did you have any relationship with classical music on the saxophone?
I mean, so I had a parallel kind of thing. Like my uncle gave me a big box of jazz singles when he bequeathed us this big box when I was about 8 or 9. So I started listening to that music, although my parents are not interested in it. And then I found friends as a teenager who were really, really into jazz, and then um, very much into, say, like Bitches Brew and these kind of Miles and 60s, 70s records, you know. So there was a total immersion for me in that as a teenager. And I knew that I did not want to play classical music on the saxophone. But when I did start playing, I took out Bach cello suites, I think, and played them really badly. So there was definitely, yeah, this is what I know. I know how to read notes, and I will just like, this is how I'm gonna start this, and then just gradually moved away. I think I moved away. I basically took out these cello suites and started playing them in the subway in London and made like a few bucks. And then I was walking home, or like walking to the subway station that I was going to take my train off, and there was a guitarist who saw my case and he said, "Hey, do you want to jam?" And I was 19, so I was like, "Sure." And I got out my horn, and he played some sort of, I think he played Bob Dylan songs, and I just improvised with him. And I realized that that was much more fun than being by myself playing cello suites badly. So I think that was really the beginning of it, you know.
So that's such a unique way to start the saxophone. So then where did you go from there? I know you did a lot of busking, and so you continued that sort of thing, but then how did you, when you obviously you got more serious at some point about like really pursuing this and playing in venues and stuff, so how did you establish yourself in London?
I think it was just gradual. It was just doing it and doing and doing it. So subway, then somebody heard us, and would say like, it was important to me to be able to make a living of it, because I was like sort of done with where I grew up. I didn't want to ask my parents for any help, etc. So I was so determined to just survive, you know. So yeah, we busked. Then people would sometimes say like, do you want to play in my party, or do you want to play in my restaurant? And then through that, I started meeting other musicians. I started going to jam sessions, and I had that Brazilian, my ex-boyfriend with who I played at the time in the subway was a much better jazz guitarist, much better than me. So he would show me harmony because it was in his interest that I got better because he had to play with me. Then and he introduced me to, he also had a home studio, so he introduced me to a Brazilian singer who um, recorded a demo tape there. So we became friends and started playing together. You know, it was just a gradual thing. And being a searching person, I guess I was always looking for things and looking to get better in a way. I listened to a record when I was maybe 21 or so, called, I want to say it's called The Language of Truth by Julian Joseph, who's a British piano player. And there was a tenor saxophone player on it called Jean Toussaint, who I really loved. There was like this sort of like instant, like, oh, I really want to have lessons with him. So I called him up. I found his phone number in the Musicians Union book. I called him up and asked him for lessons, and he said, I don't teach beginners, you know. But he kind of heard sort of how much I wanted it, I think, and made an exception. And then he spent a lot of time, like he was great. Like I would go there for a lesson, and 3 hours later I'm coming out with my head spinning, you know. So there was some connections like that were really important. Not many, but where I really like had a concentrated time with somebody who showed me a lot of things, and yeah, it was a very gradual.
Why did you move to London in the first place?
It was actually at the time my boyfriend who wanted to move there. I was like, we had moved to, he lived in Berlin, I had moved there. And I didn't play yet, and I sort of was a little bit in limbo, you know, sort of post high school, wanting to explore but not quite knowing what I wanted to do. And so we went for a vacation to London, and we both liked it and just stayed there.
Can you talk a little bit about some of your other big influences, excuse me, on the saxophone? Both in terms of I think maybe traditional jazz playing, but also free improvisation as well. I mean, surely you would have been listening to like Ornette and
Yeah.
and kind of late John Coltrane stuff. I mean, was your introduction to that also through this box of records that your uncle bequeathed to you, or was it kind of much later that you found that music?
Well, yeah, in that box there was definitely there was the Monk records. There was Monk with Sonny Rollins. Um, there was the Miles Prestige singles, relaxing with etc. That had Coltrane on it. Um, there was it was like sort of that period, 50s and 40s, and some Charlie Parker. Um, Coltrane. I was just talking to somebody about that. Like, I remember hearing Kind of Blue for the first time and thinking, Cannonball Adderley smokes this guy. Why is everybody talking about Coltrane? I'm so slightly embarrassed about that now, but I was 15 or 16. But then like later, I spent like the sort of the bigger part of a year kind of really memorizing his solos and also Sonny Rollins solos and I just I realized what a force he was and force he is. And I mean, I think as a tenor saxophone player you cannot get past Coltrane. I mean, it's just too magnanimous in a way. There's just all of it, like the development, the expression, the sound, the fact that you can pinpoint which year he recorded something, and the output, the expression, the spiritual connection, everything. So he was a huge influence for me. But then also Sam Rivers, for being so far and ahead of his time in a way, and exploring expression and sound. Wayne Shorter, Steve Lacy, a big one for me on the soprano. Just the sense that he really, this sense of stripping down ideas and just like getting so much out of one idea, and the sound. I think he must be my favorite soprano player, really, from that in that world. But then also, living in England, Evan Parker, um, Lowell Coxill. I don't know if you've ever checked him out. Such a great improviser. So much fun to listen to, and like so different to anybody else. Oh, there's many, like Ornette Coleman. I mean, Joe Henderson. In terms of the jazz world and improvisers world.
How did you decide, or when did you decide to switch from alto to tenor? Because you started on alto, right?
Yeah. But I think I started on alto because I don't know, it just seemed more common. What did you start on, both of you?
Alto.
Alto.
Yeah, there you go. It just seems,
Well, that's a classical saxophone thing too.
Oh, is it?
Maybe,
Okay.
Maybe it's just a music education thing. I
Right.
don't know.
It's just a band, high school or middle school band
Right.
situation.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny. I think I probably changed to tenor. Did I change? I think I changed to soprano. I bought a soprano first, and then changed to tenor because in jazz there's just so many more tenor players than anything else. So like the role models were tenor players, and I think that's the simple conclusion, really.
So I heard in a recent interview that you did that like you fell in love with improvisation because of the freedom aspect of it that is appealing to you, that you could really just do anything. I'm wondering if how your love for improvisation has evolved or changed, or if that's still like your favorite thing about improvising.
I think what I realized after some time, after playing jazz, for a while, was that I wanted to be more involved in the overall shaping of the piece. So rather than just here's my solo and then I'm listening a bunch, and the kind of cyclical form, but I know this is the form and there's a grid, which I still love, and it's great, but I just wanted to be more involved in like yeah, just the overall shaping of it, the contribution at any given point in time, the sort of, when I play something now, what happens, how do I react to this? How do I not react to just that feeling of being like so involved and so immersed. And I think it helped my compositions, and the other way around too. Like I always feel like it was like sort of extending in both directions, because I would listen to certain pieces and just sort of um, distill what the nature of that piece is, what happens in that piece, but with a few words. And then maybe that might be a strategy that I consciously or subconsciously do in an improvisation, etc. So I think this stuff has always been evolving at the same time, But I do think it helps composers to improvise sonically too, right? You have to explore different things. If I'm, improvising with a unaccompanied violin or something, I have to find very different areas on the saxophone than if I improvise with a drummer. So to me that was uh, as an instrumentalist, that's a good discipline to have, to just try and figure out different parts of your instrument, different areas on your instrument.
Is your compositions, um, are they always an outgrowth of your playing? Like, I want to play with these people, so I'm going to write something that we can all play? Or have you ever been asked, like, can you write for us a string quartet or something that you are not involved in? And do you write for other people that you don't play with?
Um, I have done. I mean, mostly, I write myself in. But for example, when I wrote Vogelfrei for the ACO, I did not, and it was on advice of George Lewis, and I'm glad I took it, because you really, especially when you do this for the first time, you really want to sit outside. And like now, having been in the orchestra while they're playing my piece, even now I do it that for the first 4 rehearsals or so, or 3 rehearsals, I sit outside, because you need to hear the sound from outside. When you're sitting in the middle of a woodwind section, you have no idea what happens, right? So as the composer, um, that's why I write myself very relatively small saxophone parts in the orchestral setting. But yeah, for example, the ACO that was written for them. I'm composing something for a Chicago-based ensemble for the next year's season. That's a new music ensemble, so I will not be playing, and there won't be any improvisation in it. Um, I've written for groups um, of improvisers that don't read, for example. So it'd be more like strategical, or like, maybe some people read, so I write little bits of notation, but that I also don't write myself in, So yeah, this has happened. It's definitely happened. Most of the time, they want me to play though, so I give myself a role in it.
So what is when you're practicing these days, well, maybe not this exact moment, but like generally speaking, when you're practicing, are you practicing the saxophone based on like what your upcoming projects are or compositions that you're writing, or is it sort of a separate thing? I'm just wondering if you have a routine that you do, or that's something that you're striving for
Yeah,
specifically.
I feel like I had that more than I used to have it more than I have now. And I think a lot, I mean, again, not now, but I think that has a lot to do with touring a lot and being in many different situations. So my practice does tend to um, revolve around challenges that some of these compositions present, right? So if there's something that's like super hard rhythmically, or so, I'll make myself exercises and practicing this particular part. So I think my routine tends to be designed around that, and because I play a lot of original music um, that people compose, there's always something that you know you can get out of that, and or you can devise. Um, I but I have had times where I'm just like almost like sabbaticals where I'm only practicing, and then I'm making it much more structured. I might, yeah. But right now, but in the last few years, because of so much traveling and stuff, it's been less structured.
I'm curious to know also how you structure your schedule. Like, is it something you feel like you try to have control over, like when are the time frames that you're composing versus when you're touring? Or is it just kind of like depending on, like, of course you want to say yes to the opportunities that really entice you, or I'm just curious how you say yes to things, but then also how you organize around that.
Yeah. Well, I have learned to say no, which is a good thing, because for a long time I never did that, and I was basically working myself to the ground, running around, So I have definitely learned to say no, and also to take, like, if I know, for example, I write something that's large scale, I know by now that I'll have to take like 2 months out, 3 months out, and then maybe another 2 weeks out just for chart preparation, because I like doing at least most of that myself. Because I get a more of an insight into the piece. So I know that, and I will then try and keep periods completely free. So in those periods, I don't take on rehearsals. I don't take on gigs around town. If I know I'm in New York for 3 weeks, I know I have something to write, I'll just turn it down unless it's something really, really exciting. Um, I had to learn that, because, like, especially with composing, I feel like time flies, and you sort of don't want to be ripped out of it when it starts flowing. And it can sometimes take a minute until it starts flowing. Sometimes you're so involved in detail, and then you have to step back again, and you go back into the detail. And if then you suddenly have to go and take a bus to play a little gig somewhere in town, or so, that it's hard to kind of go back into to the same place where you were. So for me, it's easier to write when I have complete freedom of when I do it, how long I do it, and I tend to write relatively quickly but very concentrated. So this has been my way of making sure I get to that. Um, yeah, and then some things I always keep a notebook with me. So because I also, I don't know how you guys feel about that, but inspiration can hit at really weird moments, and I feel like you need to have something to jot it down fast, and in words and little scribbles, whatnot. So I always have a book with me, and I'm also somebody who gets ideas when I get ideas when I move more than when I'm static. So walking around, cycling, all sorts of things. um, yeah, so that part is important for me too.
When you're in the thick of a composition, are you also playing and practicing your instrument a lot, or do you have to kind of separate these things? Like you sit down with paper and compose, or do you compose at the instrument?
I separated. Yeah, I mean, when I'm really, really in the middle of composing, I maybe practice an hour a day or something like that at the end of the day, just to not lose touch with the instrument. But I feel it at the end of a period like that. But I almost have to separate it. um, I rarely write from the saxophone. I mostly use the piano. Although this has changed during the pandemic, because it's changed a couple of times. Once I had a band called Ubertuba, which is just horns and drums, and it did not make any sense to me to write from the piano, because it was just so based on wind and on breath and everything. And during the pandemic, that kind of happened again, because the only instrumentation I have available right now is saxophone and drums. And it's been great, actually, in a way, because the limitation has been interesting for us, I think, for both of us. But yeah, the music that I've written since the pandemic is very, very intuitive, very fast. I just scribble it down and then correct it a little bit if I don't like something. um, very different to what I normally do. And yeah, how did I get there? I don't even know. Talk too much. um, but yeah, I usually separate it, and I mostly write from the piano
Do
or in
you
my
use the
head.
drums? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I write in my head as well, like you know, like what I just said, like when you just sometimes hear a piece in your head and you can write it down in words, but not in notes. But just a general thing. This is what the piece does. Here it peaks. This is, a kind of a sonic description of it. So my writing is a combination of the two, I think. But go ahead. Sorry
I
to
was just
interrupt.
curious because you do have a drum set at home. Do you play it to figure stuff out on that in terms of your composition or for other reasons?
Too shy. uh, Not really. No, I usually but I would ask Tom to play things, right? Like so we have always done that because we played together in so many different groups and of all sorts of sizes. We usually, whether it's my own music or somebody else's music, if we're both in it, we practice it here as a duo first, so we get like a sort of backbone idea of it, and then it's like the rest is just like it's like gravy when the rest of no when the rest of the music comes, when the other musicians come in, it's like such a pleasure, to hear it with the full sound, but you don't have to concentrate as much on your individual part. You can actually hear the rest. So yeah, I'll ask Tom to play it and then modify it rather than me trying to do it.
It's interesting to me that you said that you compose mostly at the piano, um, especially considering us just talking about you getting away from things about thinking about harmony, too much in your own playing. Is that a sense of just trying to get everything, if you're writing for multiple forces, in the same key so that you're not like doing a lot of transposition, or is that just from uh, that was your first instrument?
I think it's one of the thing is range, right? Like so you have really a lot of instruments range are covered by the piano. So especially if you write for larger ensembles, you can hear the parts in where they are. And then there's also the possibility of playing chords, playing, being polyphonic, and also being able to play more than one line at once, right? So you can at least hear them against each other.
Do you
I find that
ever
useful still.
do you ever perform or improvise on the piano?
Very occasionally. Yeah, I've done it a couple of times, like over recent years, where mostly as a change of color. Not because I think I'm a great piano player, but because I wanted a change of color. I can count it on my on one hand. I was.
I'm curious to know more about your just like long-term collaborating with Tom because you've played in so many different situations and for so long, uh, and he's probably been one of the only people you've played with in recent months. So, um, and yeah, so I'm wondering like how do you keep it fresh? How do you all keep it so that you, I don't know, keep it fresh? That's probably the best way to ask.
Yeah. Well, we have uh this is why this period has been interesting, because we have decided early on to record every week and just put it out there, sort of as a document, just to and also to just to keep working on something, because that same thing that made me practice Goldberg is like basically uh, just a sense of some continuity, because everything else was ripped from us for now we have cancellations reaching into May next year, right? So uh, I think we started off improvising and then playing some of my pieces, music we already knew that we had recorded or played over the years, um, and then realized that a better challenge would be to also incorporate other composers. So we just keep rehearsing, so we basically ask friends to provide us or send us their tunes, and we adapt them, and we have like and part of the fun has been to try and adapt, say, bits from an orchestra piece from Braxton orchestra piece, or we played a big band piece by Anna Weber, and I mean, we're basically allowing ourselves in this period to just use the limitation and have fun with it creatively, and the tracks are free, so nobody can accuse us of anything. um, and I think that keeps it fresh. We pick pieces that give us a challenge, or you know, and we rehearse them, and we um, we try and talk about it, we practice together, and I mean, Tom is amazing, and he doesn't make things easy for me, which is also, I mean, quite a helpful challenge, I think that's how, yeah. And I think one thing that is important to me is, or to both of us, is that we don't expect that we reinvent the wheel every time we play, right? Like there's always that thing when you're improvising, like you have to be absolutely coming up with something totally different every time, totally new every time. It's an unrealistic um it's unrealistic. I mean, of course you try and avoid like patterns and things, but there's also a thing that is sort of like, yeah, this is the person's sound. I mean when I hear Evan Barker play, I don't I still recognize him. So something is the same. He might not play the same thing, and he gets around the saxophone like nobody else. But there's still, that's still his sound, and that's what he does. And we all have that, of course, and that's also part of like what makes somebody recognizable, what makes somebody a strong voice, So I think we have figured that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we need to um, be listen and interact and make music together to be satisfied. Yeah.
So, despite the pandemic and everything, what are you working on now? What kind of projects do you have cooking up?
You know, it, it's been it's been a weird one for me because I have actually started getting my head around things that I never had time to get my head around, like like trying to learn basics of recording and film editing and things like that that actually completely external and have nothing to do with my normal life. But I feel like this is the time for me to where I can set that aside because I don't have anything in particular to work for. So that's been more, I've tried to like imagine writing for something or writing some using the time to compose something larger, for example. But it hasn't come to me, and it hasn't like it. I guess I realized that I do write for people, and when I don't have that, now I can imagine doing it again. But like when there's like absolutely no way of hearing it, or so I'm just really not feeling it. So yeah, it's been all about like learning things that I'm bad at. I've written a few essays, haven't done that since high school, things like that, like um, hobby, almost like deepening hobbies, or trying to learn something new, trying to open a new barrel of something and look into it.
What are your hobbies?
uh, well, right now it's a little enforced cooking hobby. My chopping techniques have gotten very good over the last 8 months. No, I mean, actually, to be honest, I don't know if I really have any hobbies. I mean, so even the new stuff that I'm looking into, it has a lot to do with our work as musicians, right? But I do feel like I've always left recording and all of that to pros because I like it. I'd like not to have to deal with technology while I want to concentrate on the music only, and I cannot get the same results. I value the expertise and everything, but it has at the same time been liberating to be able to record at home and just like I can value the freedom, right? The artistic freedom that you have by doing it. So it's it's a it's worth getting some of it together, I think.
Also, it probably gives you a more informed sense, like next time you have a big project that you might know like which microphone you want to use for a specific instrument, or like I don't know, things like that are helpful to know.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Although even that, I'm usually quite happy to leave this up to people. The least I have to get involved in that, the better. I love mixing. I love like being present at mixing and but like the whole recording side, I'm normally super happy leaving it up to people.
I just have one more question. I'm curious to know how you started composing, in terms of like, did it just go hand in hand with you starting to improvise, or did it come with like you starting a band and you needed music and so you started writing because out of necessity for a specific situation?
Yeah, more the second one. I was in that Brazilian group with this Brazilian singer, and she had a deal with a record label, with Candid Records, and the CEO of that label, CEO, I guess so, of that label, had asked me several times whether I want to make a record myself, you know, and I was always very, nah, I don't want to be a band leader. I'm quite happy to just be a side person in a band. I was incredibly shy about writing, and I think the one reason for that is that I had like almost too much respect for it, and I felt like, well, once I put this, you play solo, it's gone, right? Like this was part of the beauty of improvising for me. But the sort of like perfectionist in me was like super, found the prospect of just writing something down and saying this is it and this is what I like and this is who I am super daunting. So I just didn't do it. And then eventually this guy, um, Alan Bates, he wore me down, and I was like, okay, I'll do it. And it was so stressful for me to start composing. It was really, really stressful. But I did it, and realized that it's like everything else. You practice it, you get better, right? It's like, it was just, I just had not, couldn't conceive that before, that yes, you do it, somebody corrects you, you correct yourself, the musicians you rehearse with correct you, and you get better at it. But that first record, I still haven't even played it to Tom yet. It's like it was in our nuptials, so he can never listen to it.
That's so funny. Kyle, do you have any more questions?
Yeah, I have one more question. Speaking of technology, you said you spent some time recently getting more into recording and mixing.
Very basic, yeah.
Well, you've also played quite a bit with Sam, who does a lot of electronics on the computer. Have you gotten into that at all? Do you play with any other or improvise with electronics at all? Or have you gotten into learning how to do electronic things, or is that even an interest for you?
Again, I've done that very little, because I love the interactive aspect, and I feel like if I do the electronics myself, there will be less of it. I like that when Sam throws, he's such a master at it, and he throws something back at me, where I can just faintly recognize that as me, but half an hour ago and completely distorted. There's just something so. It makes the journey more interesting for me than if I have any influence about it myself. So the improvising aspect is important to me, and plus he knows so much about it. Like I'm actually, I like that more. Um, I have played also with Anthony Braxton, who used a Super Collider in some of his ensembles, but at a very, very slow pace. So it was almost this like dreamy thing that occasionally would throw something at you. I loved that a lot. But I have been thinking about that during this pandemic too. Like, yeah, maybe I should get at least the grasp a bit of a Maximus B or Ableton Live or something like that, just to know what these people do. Having said that, with Sam, we sit down, and talk about stuff like, what can you do to create this effect or to create this, and I'll leave the technology up to him.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ingrid.
Thank you, guys.
It's interesting to learn more about you, and hopefully I'll get to hear you play live again not too long.
And likewise, yes, both of you.